Hello, everyone. I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We'll probably have a few people joining us. Welcome to the Language Access Planning Workshop. I was thinking it's sort of like when you get on a plane and they tell you you're going to be landing today in Detroit. And if you're not going to Detroit, get off the plane. So like if you're not here for the Language Access Planning Workshop, get off the Zoom link. This is what we're doing today. So I'm coming to you from Luna Language Services. We are an interpreting and translating agency, among some other things, located in Indianapolis, Indiana. We've been in business almost 20 years, and I'm the president here. We have people signed up today from all over Indianapolis and Indiana. As well as some people joining us from out of state, the West Coast, California, where I grew up, in Oregon, where I went to school. So welcome one and all. I wanted to give you just a little introduction to how I came about doing language access planning. I've been at Luna almost 15 years, and prior to that, I was practicing human rights attorney at a pretty small non-for-profit. And before that, I got myself through college and grad school by writing grants. So that was sort of my side gig, but I learned a lot about grant writing and a lot about not-for-profits. And so when I came here to Luna, many of our clients were what we call Title VI clients: hospitals, courts, schools, organizations that needed to provide language access because the government expected them to. And part of their compliance was to have what's called a language access plan. And so that's where I came to start doing them in earnest for pretty big places: airports, courts, hospitals, among others. This work with not-for-profits is my favorite language access planning. It's much more creative, and it allows really, instead of using it as a check off the box because the federal government wants me to do this tool, it's really a planning tool for your organization. And as our demographics continue to grow, and diversify, it's a tool that more and more of us are needing. So that is how we came here today. If you haven't already, I'd like for everyone just to put in the chat box your name, your title, and your organization so we can see who's in the room with us. And of course, you can use that chat box throughout the hour to ask any questions. This is actually going to be an interactive workshop. I've never done it virtually before. It's usually more than 1 hour and in one room. But the goal of today is for at the end of this hour, for you to be able to explain what a language access plan is and why your organization might need one. And even better, number two, you should have a draft language access plan started. If you didn't receive a language access planning guide, never fear, we will send you it again at the end of the workshop. And I just asked that you take notes as we go. If you do have the document, you want to pull it up, and we're going to actually have you start filling it out. And by the end of the hour, it's not going to be finished, but it will be started. So without further ado, let's start planning. I wanted to point out that today we will be highlighting an organization, Exodus Refugee. When we decided to do this workshop, we thought it would be usually, if we were live, we'd have people in the room literally workshop their organization into this guide. Because we couldn't do that as easily, we decided to take an organization and highlight how they would answer the questions in this document. So I'm actually on the board of Exodus, so I was able to answer some of the questions, but I wanted to thank them because they provided some important data that you'll see. Okay, so before we start going into this, I would like to know in the chat if you can just say whether or not you have worked at an organization that has a language access plan. So just like simple yes or no. And I would expect most people would say no. I am happy to see someone said yes. More than one person said yes. If you've worked at bigger hospitals, maybe some court systems, a municipality, it might be a yes. If you're at a not-for-profit and you've always been at a not-for-profit, the answer is probably no. What is a plan? Sorry. There we go. A language access plan, it's a document or a system or a procedure that really spells out how an organization can provide services, okay, to individuals that do not use English. You're going to hear the word LEP, limited English proficiency, or limited English proficiency. Those are terms that come from federal compliance speak, and so we carry them forward into this plan. You might hear about that label out in the world as well, but you get to sort of define it yourself inside of your plan. Language access plans are tailored to the organization that writes them, but they're really similar in terms of the outline that's usually presented in them because, again, they're stemming from a compliance document. So you'll get familiar with needs assessment. We'll talk a little bit about types of language services, notices, and these trainings and evaluations. These are elements of pretty much every plan. Now, who should have a plan? Well, you can answer all organizations should have a plan. We know that organizations that receive federal funding in the form of state funds, grants from any federal agency, when I say state, it's state that's linked to federal funds. So like a lot of educational funds, sometimes Medicaid, Medicare reimbursements, those are all considered federal funding. So not all your organizations would fall into that category, but some of them might, or you might be wanting to go and expand your grant search to include federal funds. So this is something that puts you in the bucket of organizations that would want to have or should have a plan. Outside of that, healthcare organizations also should really have a plan. Is it mandatory? For those groups, it's considered mandatory, and it stems from equal protection laws. So that is where the right to language access stems, the obligation to provide language access, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And then we had former Presidents Clinton and Bush, through executive orders, link that right into a compliance requirement to do a language access plan. So that's where it comes from, and it is regulated by the Department of Justice. And so most of you won't ever have a compliance review around it. So you'd fall into this category of wanting to have a language access plan for other reasons. And they're really good reasons, they're important reasons. For those of you who are grant writers in the group, when I say things like needs assessment and establishing a population of stakeholders, that should be ringing, like your ears should be ringing, because you can use this language access plan and the elements of it to build a case for funding. If you wanted to include language services inside of your budget in a grant, this document is going to really help you do that. Maybe you're doing strategic planning for your organization, and part of the plan is to increase your service population who doesn't want to grow. And this plan will also be a really good tool for that. It, of course, supports diversity, equity, inclusion. A lot of organizations are trying to up their training, and this is a perfect document that would spell out those types of trainings to help support those programs. So other than that, it's just a lot of times language services is an unknown budget line for organizations, and this helps kind of gain control over setting up a budget for your organization. We're not going to go into what's called a 4-part test. The 4-part test is a really big element of Title VI compliance language access plan. So I would be irresponsible if I didn't introduce it to you. You won't really need to use it. We're not going to do math today, but it's part of a planning tool as well that the federal government would look at and that you can look at to decide how much language services you want to give. Okay, so we're not going to really use it today, but I wanted to let you know there is a test or a tool that can help organizations say, okay, we know there's 100 languages spoken in this city, for example, but I don't have the budget to translate my website or my intake forms into 100 languages. How can I decide how many I need to do and still be compliant? This is the test you would use. So I think what I'd like to start doing is going into the elements of the plan, and this is where we're going to bring Exodus into the group. And if you can pull up your document, this is where you can start taking notes about your own organization. So we have a lot of organizations represented today. Exodus is also a not-for-profit, and you're going to want to say where you're located, what type of organization you are. If you do fall under that Title VI federal funding category that I spoke of, it's really important that you reference Title VI into some of the introduction and background. It's expected that you will know the laws that support this plan. So I am going to actually take this little statement and stick it in the chat. And that way you can just copy it. I'm going to do that a few times today. So here we go. So you can just copy and paste that, and you can add to it if you wish. And before I tell you what Exodus's purpose of having a language access plan is, I'd like to hear from some of you, and maybe all of you who can, to write in the chat box right now. How are you hoping a language access plan can support your organization? So there's no right or wrong answer to this, but just take a minute and type in, how do you think a language access plan, or what do you hope to get from a language access plan in terms of the support it can give to your organization? So I assume some of you are typing that up, and as you do that, okay. So we see like making communication accessible at a global level. We are a globally interconnected world more and more. And so there's really an argument that all organizations could benefit from looking at the ways, including language and things like interpreting and translating, could support their marketing or their service provision. And yeah, to be able to reach more families, to be able to take your great services that you're already providing and grow them to new communities. And I see that that people who don't only speak Spanish, or people, we know that Spanish is often included in a lot of people's communications, but other languages really don't. And so all of these reasons that you are thinking about and writing about, the fact that your organizations are diversifying, that you want to get ahead of that, these are reasons that are going to go right into the purpose of your language access plan. Okay, so Exodus is actually a refugee resettlement organization. Some of you know it. It's one of the larger organizations in the Midwest, actually. We have several here in Indiana, and they are interacting with immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers and others, many or most of whom may not have English as their first language or use English at all. Your organization might also be serving and should be serving and including the deaf and hard of hearing community. And so the purpose of this plan is to really take all of those people that you're either currently serving or wish to include in the conversation that you're having about your marketing and planning your services. So for Exodus, they knew that having effective communication was absolutely critical to reach their goal. And I like to include a vision statement and a mission statement into there. So this isn't a way you can just drop in, cut and paste from your books, if you don't know it by heart, from your websites, your vision and your mission, to show that increasing access is going in around language is going to support the growth of the mission and vision of your companies. This is a little bit service provided. Next section. This is all about you, and it's going to be different for every organization. Exodus, as I mentioned, is a refugee resettlement organization. So when explaining the services that they provide, they're going to be things like receiving people at the airport and placing them in homes, finding them jobs, giving them training, all the things that an organization such as theirs would do. Your organization does things like feed people and give health care to people. You might be an advocacy organization. You might be an association of some sort. And this is where you're going to say the services you provide to your members or clients. So that one shouldn't be too hard for you. The needs assessment, I mentioned this before, and for the grant writers again in the group, this will be an important and comfortable element. This is where you take and define the people that you are serving and who you wish to serve. And there's a few steps in it. But again, this is something you should already know, right? Who is the target population that you are currently serving in your organization? So as I'm speaking, I want you to take a few minutes and just, bullet those folks out. Are they people that are located in your neighborhood, in your community health clinic? Are you the Alzheimer's Association and you're serving families of people who are suffering from that disease, and they come to you? There are lots of target populations out there. So I hope you've put a few in there. For Exodus, as I mentioned, there's our victims of human trafficking and asylum seekers, and a long list of people that they service and help relocate here in Indiana. Furthermore, what we want to do is define what LEP means to you, okay? And I will just go in here and put this chat in the chat box again. Because many language access plans, they kind of overlook the deaf community and the hard of hearing and the deaf blind community, because traditionally they weren't included in this planning process. And of course, they should and would be part of your planning, because we know that the deaf community represents, here in Indiana, it's about up to 10% of our population is hard of hearing or deaf. So you would not want to not have them in your plan. So go ahead and stick that sentence in your plan. And also something to think about, and this would be relevant to my company. Oops, excuse me. Sorry. Some members of your staff may not use English as well. So at Exodus, that's the case. They have a very diverse staff, and that's the same with my company at Luna. And some people may not prefer to use English, even if they speak English. Maybe they have a complaint or some sort of emergency while they're at work and they want to communicate with HR or someone privately, but they really want to use their first language of choice. We have deaf and hard of hearing people on staff, so we need a plan where they can have access to our meetings and to participate equally. So you also might have language needs in your staff, and you're going to want to build that into your plan. And then anyone else you can think of. So if you see almost every language access plan, they're very boring. I'm a visual person, and I think that this document is a tool to be proud of, to be able to show the public and to highlight who you are and who you're serving. So I'm a big fan of including photos and pictures of your stakeholders, of your office, of your staff inside of your meeting. So let me ask, does anyone have any questions about stakeholders and what we've covered so far? I don't see any questions. So if you have them, go ahead and ask. And we're going to get into the part of the language access plan where we're starting to look at data. So the next item is to quantify the individuals who need your plan, okay? So this is a little bit tricky, because it's not just the people you think need your services, right? It's the people who you may not know of that need or want or could use your services. So part of the planning is actually strategy to grow, and you're going to get information, and this is really powerful. In going through this process, you're going to learn information about the demographics around your service areas that might surprise you. I know for certain, when I have worked with not-for-profits around this and at this step, they are always shocked by the number of cultures represented, by the number of languages represented. We passed out ahead of time. Let me see. I'll bring it up on the screen. We passed out language and demographic data, so we cheated a little bit. We are handing you some of this data, and if you're not in Indiana, at the bottom of this document, we have some national language usage data that you can pull from. And then after the end of the workshop, we're going to send you some links where you can actually go in and find your own local data. Most of our data on demographics are based off of the census, which, as you probably heard, might be incomplete, unfortunately, this year. It's a huge disservice to all of us, but one of the things that we're left with is incomplete data about our diversity and our diversifying populations. We have the data that's been collected up until about 2018. So you'll see some of it here, and feel free to pull this when you're doing your language access plan into the data section. So I'm not gonna go there yet. I'm interested if, hold on, here we are. In your chat, can you estimate the number of languages that you think might be represented in your current service population, the current population that you serve? About how many languages are you touching? Your clients, your members, your staff, more or less. Just write in a number. How many languages do you think you're currently serving? And either my chat's slow or you haven't quite answered yet. So I'll tell you that usually people, okay, so 40, that's a big number. So that's good. That's a great estimate. Okay, 20 to 30. And some of this might depend also on your organization. If you're Catholic Charities and also a refugee resettlement org, you might also have a big number. If you're located in more of a rural area, your number might be less. I am curious though, and we won't be able to do this remotely, but think in your mind, how many languages do you think you're missing? So if you, Sarah Wilson, had guessed 20 languages you're currently servicing, which is a lot. The question is, how many are you missing? How many is out there? And that's where you can look at the data that that demographics data. All right. So I am going to put this in the chat as well, so you can sort of just copy this model. And you'll see, sorry, I can get to the chat. There we go. You'll see Exodus Point has four parts to their demographics. And then this is just creating an outline for this answer, okay? So number one, they're gonna use census data, okay? So that's can be pulled from those demographic points that we discussed that I just pulled up. Number two, they're gonna look at their internal reports. Okay, so they're gonna look at data that they're already compiling over, and we did it with them for a 1-year period. So they're gonna look at their actual clients. You may not have that data. You may not know what languages your clients all speak or people that call in for information. But part of this planning is to determine what you can start to do to keep track of this, to demonstrate a need. Number three, they included their staff census. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you're going to want to know who in your organization already speaks languages, right, that you might use, or who are already acting as interpreters or translators for you. You have resources in your organizations you might not even be aware of yet that you could pull on. And number four, we wanted to include for them, I should say, input from third-party refugee organizations. So in terms of planning ahead, as they're expanding their services, they might want to, and you as well might want to use some strategy and say, oh, okay, we want to model our program based off an organization, say that's in Chicago, and we want to grow in ways they have. So maybe they're going to give you some of their information or data about how their language needs have grown. And so that's a great element to leave in there. All right. So there we just see those elements right there. Okay. So based off of the 2010 census data, we know here in Marion County, and that's where Exodus is, and their majority of their clients are. They know that 13.5% of them, at least, right? This is old data, do not use English in their home. Okay. And then they can look at the top languages used in Indiana. There's a link to that I can give you. And then look at their own representation of those languages and kind of say, okay, so here in our organization, the LEP population that is most relevant to our work and our growth are these languages. Now, if you are not an immigrant or refugee organization, and even if you are, again, you might want to be inclusive of the deaf and hard of hearing, deaf-blind community, because that designation crosses over into all cultures. Then the second element I mentioned, Exodus looked at their own data, and this is where you might want to do a 1-year look back, a 2-year look back, or a 5-year look back even, to see who have you already serviced that were representing other cultures that might have asked you for an interpreter. If you have that data, that's great. And then I also mentioned, so you can see for them over the past 6 years, 83 different languages were spoken by their clients. I wouldn't expect all of you to have that big of a number, but if you do, you're reaching a lot of people already. Again, I would mention your own staff and do a little bit of a census on them to see what languages they speak. And then ultimately, if they are trained and able to interpret and to translate, you can use them if they're able to fit it into their schedule, kind of as a second hat. So I'm gonna give you this in the chat again. It's another tool, and I'll send it to you a little later because I'm having a hard time getting into the chat. But so a suggestion for other orgs is you can reference that 4-factor analysis or not. But basically, you are going to be able to not only look at your current population, but additionally over the next, say, 5 years, you could say 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, you want to expand your reach to include people that speak, say, in this case, it was Russian and Vietnamese, but you might want to build your own list there. And again, that's for marketing materials, like in terms of your website, in terms of having signage. You might want to provide services to all the languages and be set up for that. But for the marketing materials, you can really use it as a plan to grow. So I want to take a little breather because we're going through a lot. And I'm going to actually just stop sharing my screen for a minute. And okay, most of you are muted, or I can't see your video, so that's fine, but at least you can see my face for a minute. How many of you, and again, let's just do a yes or no, are currently working with interpreters and translators? So you could just say yes or no. Currently working with interpreters and translators. Yes, yes. Okay, so this is great. this is good for me to know that I don't have to go into who those are. And so people can be bilingual employees, or they can be multilingual for that matter. So you might have people inside your organizations that are doing interpreting, or you might be contracting with people, or you might be contracting with an agency like Luna or others. But I'm happy to know that almost everyone on the call has experienced that. So we're not just staring at the screen. I'll tell you that with Exodus, their situation was unique because prior to their clients arriving, they get notice that someone's coming, and then they speak Kirawanda, for example, or it could be a dialect that they don't even have experience servicing before, but they have notice ahead of time. Not all of us are that lucky that we get a phone call or an email that tells you, hey, so-and-so's on their way. But some of you are. Some of you might get references from medical providers, from schools. You might be a resource on someone's resource list. And in that case, if you're getting a referral, you might get a phone call that says, hey, I have a woman I'm sending over, and by the way, she speaks Arabic and she doesn't speak English. So this is where those language services really come into play. So the next section of the plan is just spelling out your organization's maybe order of operations is a good way to say it, your plan to get service provisions to your staff and your clients and your members. So let's look at how Exodus has done it. And here we go. So I mentioned that Exodus receives notification, and then on arrival, they will use a step-by-step approach. So the first place they go is to their trained bilingual staff. At Exodus, a lot of the staff members there speak many languages. So they know as part of their job, they will be interpreting. They actually receive some training around that, which is very important. Those of you who work with interpreters know that there are ethics and codes of conduct and just some hard skills involved in it. And there will be certain situations where you absolutely do not want to use a staff member to interpret for another staff. At Luna, I mentioned we have a deaf employee, and we regularly use other staffs to interpret for that employee. But those other staff members are trained interpreters. We're lucky in that sense. You want to be careful and make sure you're never using staff to interpret confidential issues, HR issues, conflicts, or just even put them in a compromised position. So, but it's wonderful to have them if you do. Exodus will then go and they move on to a contracted staff, because Exodus is literally placing refugees and immigrants, train them in English, and have a employment sort of agency, employment function. Hiring former clients as contracted interpreters works out really great for them. And so they were able to put that in. So it's their trained staff, then they go to their network of contracted staff. If they are still not available, they will then go to qualified vendors. And that's like a Luna, like a company like my own. There might be another company. They have spelled out over the phone interpreting, virtual interpreting, and translation. And in the plan, you're going to say exactly where you go, and you can get as detailed as you want about it. You'll have request numbers and any kind of procedures in there. You can see for Exodus, we went ahead and spelled out what they would do for walk-in clients, for ongoing appointments. So your plan would really look envision all the scenarios, all the points of contact that your stakeholders, your LEP stakeholders would have with your organization. It might be a phone tree. See, you'll see I said here with additional funding, Exodus is going to suggest an after hours multilingual phone tree. So part of the plan is to not only say how you are currently doing your language access services, but you can also really build in how you want to grow and your wish list. And then that helps, you can share this whole plan with a funding organization if you want, but you don't have to send them all of it. You can pull parts of it. And here you're starting to build your case. Oh, this is something we could use grant dollars towards. All right. So vital documents and translation is a big part of language access. And those of you who have intake forms and consent forms may already be translating those in at least Spanish, possibly some other languages. For sure, vital documents are the ones that, well, they speak for themselves. They're the ones that you actually you do not want someone's signature on them if they did not if they could not read it. You might be liable if you put a signature on it, knowingly accepting it when you knew the person may not have been able to read it. So I will be passing out after the workshop a link to a list of vital documents. So you'll have that at your you'll have that list in front of you, and you can maybe look at your own organization and say, what do we do here? Maybe it's a handbook or parts of a handbook for a staff member. Those are the things that you'll want to identify in your language access plan as always getting translated. There will be lots of other documents that you won't have the budget to translate. But here's again where you can say, as funding becomes available for the future, you can start adding your wish list of, we want our website in 3 languages. We want to take some of the documents and materials from our programs and get them translated. And then we can do some targeted outreach into different cultural communities. And again, that could link to funding around diversity, equity, inclusion, just program building in general. So use this as a listing of your minimum that you want to translate, but then your wish list as well. I did say to consider inclusion of Braille. That could be on anything from signage in your office to a key intake form. A lot of people are really surprised how affordable Braille is to get, and we can help link you to an organization in town that does that. Our next section is on notices, and part of the expectation, at least of that Title VI compliance through the Civil Rights Act that we mentioned, is that not only would you provide access, but you would provide notice to your stakeholders that language access is important to you. So I am going to pull up a few examples of that so you can see what it looks like. Let's hope this is the right screen. I think I'll stop sharing. And I'll just go back. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is what people call point to your language or I speak cards. You can see, maybe some of you know some of these languages. I speak Greek, so Milao Ellinika is right here. But the idea is that you would have this for someone who, say, walked into your office, or even a form that they were filling out online, and they could indicate to you what language that they needed. this is one of our clients actually, and they put notice on their website, which is really, really good practice to do. So ideally, your website might be in numerous languages, but at the very least, if you do provide interpreting, it's really great to put on your website. They were quite creative and just put their point to their language guide on their website, and someone could pull it up at any time. For some reason, there it comes. So this is another example of what a point to your language guide would be. This is something you could have at your reception desk, at an event if you're out in the community. It looks like this is a little slow. Oh, there you go. So again, these are the languages that were represented here in Indiana. You can see, and those of you who are here know, we have quite a bit of a large Burmese population. So wherever you are, you would look to your language data and demographics to decide what languages would go on your point to your language guide. You could use someone else's, quite frankly. You could take a generic one, but it's great to have your own because it's tailored to your needs. And then you could partner with your translation company to have it say anything that you would like. So this is another one that we have for our clients. So I just wanted to show you a few examples of notices and what they would look like. Other ways you can announce how awesome you are and providing language services is like social media. You've probably seen, as you're going into some buildings, they'll say like habla español, like we speak Spanish. And in our office, we have some sign language ASL signs just to indicate to people walking in that members of our staff speak sign language. So you can get really creative about it. And I urge you to, because it will get people's attention. And if it's on social media, it will be shared. So even though this is sort of like a boring government plan, what I'm urging you all to do is take it and integrate it into your creative marketing and strategic planning of your company. So for Exodus, I'm not going to go through it all, but they spelled out exactly what they do and when they give notice to their clients that they have language services available. And they also spelled out when they send interpreters to be with their clients. So you could do the same thing. They use a point to your language guide. They use what's called an I Speak card, which are just different versions of what I showed you. If you have a plan, you can go ahead and just add it as exhibits to the back of your plan. So all right, so you can see on their wish list, Exodus planned to create a digital welcome sort of package of materials prior to their client's arrival. And they wanted to do signage up in the top 10 languages. They have signage in their office of a few languages, but they want to be able to expand that. So again, it's just thinking ahead. The last sort of important section of your language access plan is how are you going to get your staff trained? So this becomes not only a review of your demographics and a visionary tool for your strategic planning. It also becomes an operational document to set out training for your staff, to teach them how to access interpreters, to train them on how to use interpreters. It could be part of your, again, diversity, equity, and inclusion training plan for your organization. All of this would be poured into this section on your LAP. And I mentioned some of the things that Exodus is doing, some of those things, and the training that they give their staff. You can see that they have planned future training when funding becomes available. So they want to train 3 bilingual employees a year in Bridging the Gap, which is an interpreter training program. It's a great thing to build into your language access plan. They want to do some deep dive into looking at people's perception and bias around Asian cultures. And they are going to send a staff member out to attend a professional association meeting for interpreters. So this is ways that they are building the resources inside of their organization and setting up a plan for training. You can even create a calendar of training. And I will tell you, if you do have an auditor that comes, they will be super impressed. And I've found that these documents actually are great evidence of compliance of a lot of things. So keep that in mind as well as you're deciding how robust to make yours and whether to make the case to do it at your organization. Last but not least, what we want to do is make sure that the implementation of your plan is being monitored, much like you would if you got a grant and you wanted to make sure that the money was being put to good use. I shared some notes with you about what you want to think about when you decide who's going to monitor your plan. I think this is a really important time or moment to think what kind of tracking system you might already have inside of your organization. If you don't have one, it's a great time to build one. So again, it might be someone who's responding to requests on email, someone who's answering phones, someone at your front office, once we have front offices again, that greet the public. They can have tracking mechanisms where they keep track, okay, I interacted with 5 Spanish speakers today, or 1 person came to my office this week who was deaf. And over a course of a quarter, 6 months, a year, that data becomes very important, very powerful, and it will help you going forward as you revise and review this language access plan. It will help for you to figure out your budget line, really. So at Exodus, they indicated that their directors and case management would be the ones responsible for that tracking, but only you know who would be best to do that tracking inside of your own organizations. Exodus decided that they would want to build in a future monitoring that had to do with client satisfaction and feedback about whether their needs were met. That's really something great to think about. If you are interacting, let's say, with a group of Spanish clients, Spanish participants in your programs, think about reaching out to them and then asking them, hey, were you able to sign up? Did you feel like you had easy access? Were there any glitches? What's missing? What would you like to see more of? And so that's going to give you information from your stakeholders, how you're doing, in a way that, we just can't see ourselves all the time and point out our own faults or our own areas of growth. So I really recommend that. This last part is pretty just setting up a timetable. Like, we're going to review this plan every other year or every year. The bigger your organization is, the more important it would be to get this on multiple people's calendars. But if you're a smaller org, this is something that you can kind of revise as you go. At Exodus, they decided to give their director of operations the responsibility to coordinate the plan. And at your organization, you're going to want to find someone who would be well suited to gathering, monthly reports, someone who's may be connected with some of your training for your staff. so they can help onboard new staff to the language access plan. And finally, like, it'd be really important that this person would intersect with your grant writers. It might even be one of your grant writers, to be sure that your funding requests were linked to the needs of the language access plan. So that is, you probably are tired of staring at that document. I know I sure am. That is the nuts and bolts of a very basic language access plan, but it's enough to get you started in terms of the knowing what work you need to finish, knowing what questions you need to ask about your demographics, and building a budget around successfully implementing your plan. Let's see. I'm now looking for any questions, because this is the time we can do that. And then if we don't get to some of the questions, I'm happy to respond to any of you afterwards. In case some of you have to drop off, just know that we'll be following up with this presentation. Number one, it's recorded, so if someone in your organization couldn't make it, they'll be able to watch it. Number two, we'll have some additional resources for you, some of which I mentioned and some of which I didn't. We'll resend the toolkit just in case you didn't get it, or you wanted to pass it on to someone. And then any important questions that I don't get to, I might address in that as well. So, do you have tips for communities that have limited English as well as limited or no literacy? We do. The literacy is important, and you cannot assume that people can always read, even in their own languages. In fact, you might want to assume that they cannot. That is why we recommend having not only a plan, say, for translation of materials, but a plan to link with a language provider. For example, a great solution is an over-the-phone interpreter. And a lot of people don't know how simple it is. It's a single phone number. You would call directly to an operator who would link you to the language that you needed. And within a few seconds, an interpreter would be on the phone. We also can do that with video now, as technology has caught up with our field. So that's another solution. The price for that would also probably surprise people, just in terms of checking in, what does someone need? And ideally, having an on-site interpreter is most people's preference. But in the day and age of COVID, or just because of demographic or geographic boundaries and challenges, you may not be able to reach an on-site interpreter to link to your person, and you might be doing it over the phone or over video. So that's why those tools are really important. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then let's see, there was one more question I'll get before we drop off. A lot of people are dropping off, but if you are still here, would you recommend translating materials primarily for things where questions can be answered into the language, or is it okay to translate as much as we can? Okay, so one of the challenges is if you have materials that are in a different language, you're going to get responses back in that language. And so that's why it can be a little tricky. Yes, no questions are really helpful in that case. So you might need to simplify some of your materials. I think translating as much as you can is always a good strategy. We often get requests for big manuals. People come in and say, I need this manual on training someone to how to use a forklift. This is a real story. We need this translated in, all the languages. Well, it was too expensive. So what we did is we took the highlights of every chapter and came up with a truncated version of that big manual. And we were able to create a project that was affordable for that client. So I do think it's okay to just translate part of the most important message. If it's a vital document, and again, I'll send you a list of that, that would be probably the exception where you'd want to translate the whole document. So I hope that answers your question. Do we have any other questions before I hop off? Thank you, thank you, thank you. Oh, lots of thank yous. Well, I'm going to go ahead and just shut this down. And I wanted to thank all of you. I wanted to let you know that I truly am available to answer some questions specific to your organization. We will send out my contact information. Of course, if you need any language services, we're here for you as well. I've lost a number of people on the call, but I'll follow this up in an email as well. We just wanted to, normally we would charge for this type of workshop when it's in person, and we didn't want to do that this go around. But we did want to give our participants an opportunity to give a symbolic donation to Exodus. If you feel moved, and there's absolutely no requirement of that, but in our we could maybe stick it in the chat if we have time, a link to their website, but we'll also get it in our follow-up material. So thank you to Exodus for sharing all their information. Thank you to all of you for being interested in joining us today. And please reach out if your questions weren't answered. And good luck on your language access planning. Good luck to you. Thank you.